Quick question. What's the monster's name? If you said Frankenstein, you're wrong. But here's the twist. You're also kind of right, and Mary Shelley planned it that way. Frankenstein is the doctor, Victor Frankenstein, the man who builds a living being out of dead flesh. The creature he makes never gets a name. Not once, across the entire novel. 200 years of readers have made the same so-called mistake, slapping the creator's name onto the creation. And most people treat that as trivia, a gotcha for pub quizzes. But it's not trivia. The namelessness is the novel's deepest wound, the thing the whole tragedy grows out of. Today I want to show you why Shelley refused to name her most famous character, and why that refusal might be the most important choice in the entire book. Let's start with that famous mix-up, because it's doing more work than people think. When we call the monster Frankenstein, we're collapsing creator and creation into one identity. And honestly, the novel invites us to. Victor and his creature mirror each other constantly. They're both isolated, both eloquent, both consumed by obsession, and by the end they're locked together in a chase across the Arctic, where it's genuinely unclear who is hunting whom. Some readers go so far as to read the creature as Victor's shadow self, the part of him that acts out everything he represses. So when the name slides from maker to monster, language is quietly confessing something the book believes, that the real horror originates in Victor. The mistake isn't a misreading, it's the novel's thesis, smuggled into 2 centuries of casual conversation. Now think about what naming actually is. It's the first gift a parent gives a child. Before food, before comfort, there's a name. A name says, you belong to someone, you were expected, you were wanted, and that is exactly the moment Victor skips. Remember the creation scene. It's a rainy November night, the creature opens one watery yellow eye, and Victor's response is not wonder or responsibility, it's disgust. He runs out of the room, hides in his bedroom, and when the newborn creature reaches toward him, the way an infant reaches for a parent, Victor bolts from the house entirely. He never comes back to name him. So the creature's namelessness isn't an oversight or a spooky stylistic choice, it's the paper trail of an abandonment. He has no name, because nobody stayed long enough to give him one. So what does the book call him instead? This is where it gets brutal. Flip through the novel, and you'll find him labeled wretch, demon, devil, fiend, ogre, vile insect, and maybe worst of all, simply it. Every one of those words is a verdict, not a name. A name identifies you, a label sentences you, and notice who's assigning them. Victor, mostly the one person with the power to call him something kind. Shelley understood something we now talk about constantly, that language shapes reality. Call a being a demon often enough, and you've written his script for him. The creature is arguably gentle by nature. He starts out saving a drowning girl and secretly chopping firewood for the poor. But the words hurled at him build the cage, and eventually he decides to become what he's been called. Here's the heartbreaking part. The creature tries to name himself. Hiding in a hovel, he finds 3 books, and one of them is Milton's Paradise Lost, the epic about creation, rebellion, and the fall. He reads it like a mirror, searching for who he might be. At first he identifies with Adam, the first of his kind, made by a creator's hands. When he finally confronts Victor, he even says, I ought to be thy Adam, but adds that he's instead the fallen angel, driven from joy for no misdeed of his own. Think about what that means. Denied a name by his father, this being borrows identities from literature, auditioning for a self in someone else's story. He's the loneliest reader imaginable, scanning every page for his own reflection and finding only characters who were at least wanted. The DeLacy episode makes the wound even sharper. For months, the creature secretly watches a poor family through a chink in their cottage wall, and this is where he learns language itself. He learns the words for fire, milk, bread. He learns the family's names, Felix, Agatha, Sophie, and he learns tender words like father, sister, beloved. He acquires an entire vocabulary of belonging, and there is not one word in it that refers to him. He can name everything in the world except himself. When he finally works up the courage to introduce himself to the blind old father, the one person who can't see him, it almost works, until the others return and beat him out of the house. He fled with a full command of human language, and still no way to say who he was. And namelessness has consequences beyond feelings, because a name is also a passport into society. Think about everything a name plugs you into. A family line, a birth record, a community, a legal existence. The creature has none of it. He can't be introduced, can't be married, can't be buried under a headstone. He exists physically, but not socially, a person-shaped hole in the world. Shelley dramatizes this in the pool scene, her dark rewrite of Narcissus. The creature sees his reflection in clear water and recoils, finally understanding what everyone else sees. But I'd argue the reflection isn't the real horror. The real horror is that there's no caption under it. Every other face in the novel comes attached to a name, a history, a place at some table. His face hovers over nothing. Read this way, the creature's one great demand suddenly makes perfect sense. He corners Victor in the Alps and asks for a single thing: a companion, a female made like himself. People often read this as a request for romance, but listen to how he frames it. He wants one being who will not look at him with horror, someone of his own kind to exchange sympathy with. In other words, he's asking for the thing a name provides, to be known, claimed, recognized by at least one other creature in the universe. And Victor, after agreeing, tears the half-finished companion apart while the creature watches through a window. It's the abandonment repeated, deliberately this time. Victor doesn't just refuse to name his creation. He destroys the only being who ever might have. That's the moment the tragedy locks shut. Was Shelley conscious of all this? Almost certainly, and we have a wonderful piece of evidence. In 1823, a stage adaptation of the novel opened in London, and on the playbill, the creature's role was listed with no name at all, just a blank dash. Shelley went to see it, and in a letter she called this nameless mode of naming the unnameable rather good. She liked it. The blank space was the point. And it's worth remembering who's writing here. A teenager whose own mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, died days after her birth. An author who published the novel anonymously, whose very name was a battleground of famous parents and a famous husband. Shelley knew intimately that identity is something other people hand you or withhold. Her monster is that knowledge, walking around in a body. So here's the takeaway. We call the monster Frankenstein because a name abhors a vacuum. The label has to land somewhere, and it lands on the man who should have given one. Maybe that's the fairest verdict literature has ever delivered. The father's name, forced onto the child he refused, by 200 years of readers acting as the jury. Because Shelley's real argument was never that it's monstrous to create life. It's that it's monstrous to create life and then decline to claim it. The creature isn't born a monster. He's unnamed into one refusal at a time. So the next time someone smugly corrects you, actually, Frankenstein is the doctor, you can smile and say, exactly. The monster is just what happens when nobody claims you. Thanks for watching Between the Chapters. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this gave you a new way to see the story, subscribe to Between the Chapters. A new literary deep dive lands every week, and I'd love to have you along for the next one.